Good afternoon, everybody. This is Craig Aronoff from Barton Morris here for Cannabusiness Live. It's Friday, July 21st, and we're glad to be here to talk about dispensaries in Michigan and provisioning centers and some changes we've seen. We encourage everybody to interact, say hello, like us, share us, ask any questions throughout. We'll do our best to answer it both during the live session as well as maybe later, and we'll look forward to getting your feedback.
Yes, please do. Share this to anybody you think might like it. And of course, the recordings are always available on Facebook and also on YouTube. So we will make sure that we can keep those out there for you so that you can see our past episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So today what we're going to be talking about is dispensaries and what you want to know to open a dispensary. And so I think the first thing to do is just kind of talk about where we're at today in Michigan and how we got here, so that everyone can understand that what we may see on the streets today at different shops is not necessarily what we'll be seeing down the line.
Yeah, that's important to start off with. The Medical Marijuana Act started in 2008, and it was intended to have caregivers, individuals registered under the Act that are allowed to grow marijuana for patients, to distribute that marijuana to patients, and that's it. But of course, a lot of eager entrepreneurs wanted to get into the dispensary commercial market, and so in order to do so, they went to cities in which that they felt would allow them to do it without enforcement. And then they opened up caregiving centers or caregiving facilities. And as many people know, those facilities have flourished in places like Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, because those municipalities probably were open to it or possibly didn't have the resources at the time necessary to do anything about it. And then next thing you know, a bunch of dispensaries started opening up and openly selling medical cannabis to patients.
Yeah, and not all dispensaries are the same. There's different kinds and setups in different cities that we've seen. Some have permits from the city of Barton, and others are operating on the hope that they don't get shut down any minute at a time. But what's really happening is that there's this undercurrent where caregivers who are properly compliant with 72 plants, they have a lot of overages. They have too much excess marijuana, and so they've been working together to transfer that between themselves and then allow the second caregiver to sell it to patients through the store. What's really most important about this conversation is that until there's an actual facility license offered by the state of Michigan, what we're talking about are all facilities that are not legal under the state license law. So these are permission cities, so it's akin to taking a driver's license from the state of Michigan. It's good everywhere and comparing it to a permit to drive from the city of Detroit. And so what we are going to be seeing are licenses. Some of these that are out there are fly-by-night. They're there today, gone tomorrow. But what we want to do is change the perception, because the provisioning center under the new license law is really going to be a different type of facility, a different access to medicine, and different opportunity for patients to really receive the medicine.
It's going to be completely different. So anybody that has any type of understanding of how these facilities or these caregivers operate now, caregiving facilities operate now, it's going to be completely different. Completely different from the manner of which that they're going to be operated, the owners that are going to be operated. It's going to be state licensed right now. All the dispensaries that are in operation are not licensed by the state. If anything, they're only licensed by the city. And there's going to be tracking of every single sale, every transaction, not only between the dispensary and the patient, but also between the grower, processors, and the dispensaries as well.
Yeah, and in essence, where we are today is a situation where we don't know what the flower is that's on the shelves of these dispensaries, where it was grown, mainly which it was grown, was there pesticides, or there other type of environmental issues with it, mites or whatnot. Similarly, the packaged products that are in there don't necessarily have the labeling standards that we're going to expect to see from our new law. And so if we compare to where we were, presently, where we're headed tomorrow, the regulations that are in place with the seed-to-sale tracking and the ability to know that the edible or the vapor or the ointment or the wax, those extracts, where they were sourced from, how far back from the very beginning to that point in time, so if there is any problem with how they were actually manufactured, that process is going to be protected under the new act. So as we talk about the opportunity, what we're seeing on the shelves here in Michigan already, again, these are products that may not really survive and pass the muster when it comes down to the licensing side of things, because again, we don't know if it's an edible, for instance, how clean was the kitchen. Right now, we don't even know where the kitchen was, if it was made in the kitchen versus the garage.
I also think it's interesting that a lot of dispensaries are talking about how their product is tested, and it's tested at 28% THC. In reality, there's no proof or evidence of that. They put a sign up next to possibly that type of product and say this is 28%, this is 23%, this is 20%. A lot of people look at these and use them as a basis upon which that they're going to decide which cannabis they want to buy. There's generally it's commensurate with the price that the people are selling, but there's no real evidence of that. And I'm not saying that everybody's lying about their THC percentages, but there's a couple things going on. One, they could be lying. There's no real penalty for somebody to be dishonest about it. Two, the persons who are doing the testing, we don't know what type of testing requirements that they're engaged in, what type of processes that they're using, and whether the testing is actually really reliable. People are using handheld testing devices compared to really sophisticated testing methodology, and the testing is so all over the board that we really don't know what the tests are coming out as. And so that's all going to be streamlined and standardized under the Facilities Licensing Act, which is something that I think is going to be much more robust, much more reliable, and it's going to be much more helpful for our patient consumers.
Yeah, certainly when we think about consistency of delivery of the medicine, when we know that it's been tested on a regulated type of lab. Keep in mind, one of the licenses that we've always mentioned is a testing facility that's going to have state regulations about the type of tests and the process and their own standard operating procedures so that there's consistency amongst the labs around the state. But what that's also going to do is provide consistency in the actual medicine itself. So that, currently at the dispensary, at the front end of the street says, I got it tested, but they used, as Barton was describing, a handheld method versus a tabletop method by the dispensary up the back end of the street. That even if they're testing for the same thing, the results aren't going to be consistent. So as a patient, what outcome you're expecting from that medicine might not be the same. Whereas in the future, when you know what you're buying specifically because it's been labeled and tested properly under our state regulations that we're expecting to see that are going to be similar to other states, in that vein, now we can know if I ran out of medicine, while vacationing in northern Michigan and stop by the Vision Center, I'm going to see products that are similar to those that are actually in the south of the state, and I'm going to know they're going to actually do what I expect them to do for that medicine. And I think that's a very important difference for our patients.
Also, the testing that's going on now, I don't think anybody's really testing for pesticides and microbiological contaminants. Why? Because they don't want to. If they're going to test their medicine for pesticides, banned pesticides, too many pesticides, harmful pesticides that are present at the time of the point of sale, then they're literally putting product out there that's unsafe for patients. And so the easy thing to do is simply just not test it for that stuff at all, because none of that is what's necessary in order to sell the product. They just want to sell like THC content. But testing for the harmful products, for the harmful chemicals, is not being done. So that's all going to change.
Oh, there's no doubt it's going to change. And, this just kind of supplements and buttresses the reason why we have the new Facility Licensing Act, because all throughout the spectrum in the vertical, we've already talked about growing and cultivating last week. We'll be talking about processing next week. But, as we talk about the dispensing of it and the lab mixing of it all, what we're really doing is we're saying that regulations are going to be our friends. Regulations are going to provide an opportunity to level the playing field for all the operators in terms of knowing the consistency, the value, and of course, how improved and good they are at their product line. But, that's only one issue that these dispensaries have currently. So, we've already focused a lot about the medicine in the shelves. But what about the transfers? And, Bart, let's put your other hat on, the criminal law hat. How are these transfers legal right now?
So they're not. The Medical Marijuana Act and the Michigan Supreme Courts and the appellate courts have all determined, finally, that transfers from a caregiver to a patient that is not connected to them in the act is not a lawful transfer. So the dispensaries that are in operation right now doing these transfers, they're not lawful. So the question is then, okay, yeah, they're not being enforced, meaning the law is not being enforced, but what does that mean for that caregiver or for that facility, dispensary, in order to get a facilities license, a commercial license to operate a state licensed facility next year?
And we can talk about how, there's the belief, of course, that if you've acted improperly under the MMLA, it's going to be a large challenge to get a license in the new MMFLA. The board has already kind of insinuated that, and if there is a waiver process, how clean do your books have to be? And one of the things that's going to be important in the future that we haven't seen yet is tracking the patient. So the caregiver who is selling at the dispensary, they're only allowed to sell to their 5 patients. So even if we assume it was one of their 5, how much did that patient buy during that week? Every time they walk in, is it being properly tracked? Do they have a proper log of every sale that they made to each patient that came through the door so they can actually establish they never sold more to that patient than they were allowed? If the patient came in 3 times and bought an ounce 3 different times over the course of the week, each time they're over it. They're allowed 2.5. And so that is a problem. And in the future, the way the books and the way to seek the sale and the inventory management systems that are going to control that, if I'm a patient and I go into dispensary A and buy my ounce, go to dispensary B and buy an ounce, and I go to dispensary C, they're going to know I already bought you that week. Because this is going to be something that law enforcement wants to make sure that all the patient sales are actually tracked.
That leads me a little to another issue, which is it's not just because a patient is purchasing cannabis from a dispensary doesn't mean that they can also purchase it from a caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
That caregiver track, that the law that we have now where a caregiver can get registered under the Medical Marijuana Act and then grow and then provide medical cannabis to a patient will still exist. And so a patient can, in fact, go and purchase cannabis from a dispensary and then also purchase it from a caregiver. And I'm not suggesting that is cool so that somebody can really have more than what they're supposed to have. That's not my point. But I think a lot of people get confused and say, well, everything's going to be tracked, and what if I need more? What if my medical necessity requires more than 2.5 ounces? Well, the state's not going to be monitoring the caregivers, and caregivers are still going to be in existence. They're still going to be in demand, certainly less demand than later when the facilities licenses become available. But caregivers are still going to be in operation, and they're still going to play a useful part in the medical marijuana program within Michigan.
Well, I absolutely, and I think there's a really good example of where we're going to see it primarily, and that's where you have patients living in remote parts of the state that don't necessarily have access to a dispensary. Maybe the closest one is a 90-minute drive away. Maybe they're elderly and they're not able to get there. Maybe it's a child who's being cared for by a parent who needs to go to the store for them. Point being is the delivery to those individuals will be by their caregivers just as it always has been. It might be that caregiver doesn't no longer need to grow it for them versus buying it at a dispensary for their patients. And so we're going to actually start to see these kind of transitioning away from these home grows and going to this commercial market. In large part, too, because the opportunity for different types of medicine to be available for those patients, and a caregiver really ever can be economically incentivized to offer.
Right.
There's just no point in spending the kind of money on the type of product lines that are going to be available in the future if you're only caring for 5 patients.
So what do you think about then the issue about present dispensaries not paying sales tax and not paying, maybe some of them do, but most of the ones that I've seen aren't paying any sales tax. They're not paying that additional Michigan 6% tax and then turning that in quarterly to state.
If that's the case, then they're literally going to be businesses that are operating that aren't paying their sales tax when there's been a traditional sale in the market. Michigan requires business licenses for licensees that are operating, whether you're selling T-shirts, whether you're selling hats, or whether you're selling widgets, whatever the widget is. If you're in Michigan, you're paying a sales tax because you're an operator who owes the obligation to the state. You charge that to the customer, and it's expected, whether you're at the gas station or the Kroger. And the point being here is that these operators are not operating within this kind of regulated capacity. And of course, the state is missing out on what could be millions of dollars of tax revenue that can then be used in the normal course of its obligations. So that 6% that we already know is going to be added to the sales of dispensaries in the future, that goes to the normal sales tax fund. And of course, there's the excise fund, which will be an additional 3% because it's related to cannabis. And that will go towards all the revenues that we talked about in the past, to the county and the state level.
So what do you think? If a dispensary that's in operation right now is not paying sales tax, is it too late to do so?
No, I mean, certainly if that, the advice is for that dispensary, of course, let's clean up your books. Let's pay everything you're supposed to pay. Let's become corporate citizens in the light, not in the dark, the way we should have been all along, the way we can expect to be next year. And, you know, to the extent that we can demonstrate that we've acted as though we've had a license the whole time, at least there's the opportunity to make that argument. In the absence of that, really a gaping, very difficult obstacle to explain away when the licensing board says, well, you haven't paid your sales tax, you haven't paid your income taxes. You can't account for how many patients were actually in your facility last month, let alone last year. You know, these are all things that next year, these provisioning centers, as licensed by the state, those are easy answers. They'll be like, click, click, there's the answer. I mean, this is almost immediate information because the data set that's going to be supplied through all the inventory tracking and everything is going to be required. And so because of that, we're going to see a different form. Now we got to go back and work with these dispensaries and make sure that all of this is cleaned up and that 1 + 1 = 2 and that the money's paid.
You know, I think there are some dispensaries that are in operation right now that do use that tracking software that's available, that's becoming a lot more well-known, and I think it would be advisable for dispensaries that are in operation to, well, they're going to have to. You're going to have to adopt a third-party software system like FileTrack or MJ Freeway or Metrics. I don't think is available for a consumer, but Metrics is going to be the system that's used by the state. So it would be advisable to start tracking your sales now. That way you can provide the state with something that says that you've been compliant with respect to the sale of your medical cannabis to the degree to which that it's lawful and that those taxes are being paid.
And we'll build out your standard operating procedures because if you try to switch it next year and just say, oh, we've been doing it this way the whole time, but it should be easy, no problem. We'll just train everybody and we'll just flip the switch and all of a sudden we'll be able to follow all these rules. It won't be that easy. The corners will be cut. It will be the most likely reason you lose your license later on if you're lucky enough to get one. And so, you know, those corners cannot be cut. You need to take the time, train up the staff, make sure everybody's going to follow the rules as they're going to be provided. And granted, there's some rules that we just don't know